Are you here to take me home? The little girl's voice trembled as she held a small, worn seashell in her palm, the same seashell she had kept hidden for 9 long months. My name is Lila Monroe. For 9 months, the town of Gulf Harbor, Florida, had whispered her name in prayers, taped her posters to storefront windows, and searched the shoreline, hoping to find even the smallest clue. 9 months of waiting, 9 months of fear, 9 months of wondering if the 7-year-old girl who disappeared from her own bedroom had survived. The last person to see her was her 5-year-old sister, Sophie, a child far too young to understand what she had witnessed that warm coastal night, and far too frightened to speak about it until it was almost too late. If you appreciate deep dive true crime investigations like this one, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Crimes Unsealed, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us continue uncovering the stories that matter most. Gulf Harbor wasn't the kind of place where parents worried about locked doors. It was a sleepy stretch of the Florida Panhandle, a place where neighbors waved from porch swings, children rode bicycles barefoot down sandy streets, and the air smelled of sunscreen, salt, and drifting ocean breeze. Tourists rarely wandered past the main boardwalk. Locals lived in pastel-colored beach cottages with fishing nets on the walls and seashells collected in jars. Life felt safe here, predictable, familiar. The Monroe family lived in a small cottage tucked between a line of sea grapes and a narrow wooden path leading to the dunes. The house wasn't fancy, but it was filled with warmth. Children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, tiny footprints in the sandy carpet, the faint smell of coconut lotion and lavender detergent. For Lila, the beach wasn't a place to visit. It was home. She was 7, bright-eyed, talkative, and endlessly curious. The kind of child who picked up every shell she found, asked 1,000 questions a day, and believed every stranger was a friend she hadn't met yet. Her 5-year-old sister, Sophie, followed her everywhere. If Lila collected shells, Sophie collected the broken ones. If Lila made up stories, Sophie believed every word. The two were inseparable until the night everything changed. June 10th, 2005 had been a perfect Gulf Harbor day. The air was warm, the water calm. The sky painted soft shades of peach and pink as the sun slipped behind the horizon. Lila and Sophie spent the evening digging tiny moats in the sand, while their mother, Rachel, snapped photos for the family scrapbook she kept on the living room shelf. Back at the cottage, the girls took warm baths, their sun-blonde hair tangled with salt water. After dinner, their father read them a story about a mermaid who always found her way home, no matter how lost she became. By 9:30, the girls were curled up in their shared bedroom. Lila on the top bunk, Sophie below, a nightlight casting soft coral shapes across the walls. The house settled into its usual rhythm, the hum of the ceiling fan, the gentle crash of waves outside, the distant drone of a boat returning late to the harbor. No one knew it would be the last normal night the Monroe family would have for a very long time. The timeline that night has been pieced together through testimony, memories, and small details the police later uncovered. Somewhere around 1:20 in the morning, a wooden screen near the back door shifted, the metal edges bending just enough to let someone slip inside. The sound was soft, barely noticeable, something most families would sleep through without a second thought. But Sophie heard it. She woke with a start, blinking into the dim glow of the nightlight. She heard footsteps, slow, careful, deliberate, not heavy like her father's, not soft like her mother's, something in between. Then she saw a shadow cross the hallway. Her small body froze. She pulled her blanket to her chin, as if hiding would make the world outside her covers stop moving. Seconds later, her bedroom door creaked open. A figure stepped inside. Tall, masked by darkness, careful not to make a sound. The person moved straight to the ladder of Lila's bunk, placing a hand on the rail, then another. Sophie saw a faint glint, maybe a buckle, maybe a ring, maybe nothing at all, but enough for her mind to remember it forever. There was a whisper, a voice, low, almost gentle, words she couldn't fully hear. The figure lifted Lila into their arms. Lila never screamed, never cried, just a small intake of breath, and then silence. The intruder carried her toward the back of the house, through the door near the dunes, and vanished into the warm Florida night. Sophie didn't make a sound, not until morning. When Rachel walked into the girls' room shortly after 6 a.m., the first thing she noticed was how quiet it was. Too quiet. "Girls?" No answer. She stepped closer. Sophie sat up in the bottom bunk, eyes wide, trembling. Lila's bed was empty. At first, Rachel thought she might be in the bathroom, or the kitchen, or outside collecting shells. But the house was silent, and the back door wasn't fully closed. Her screams shattered the peaceful morning. Within minutes, neighbors were on the porch. Within an hour, officers filled the street. By afternoon, Lila's photo was taped to poles, shop windows, and every boardwalk post along the Panhandle coast. A child had vanished, and only her 5-year-old sister knew what happened, though she was too frightened to speak. Morning sunlight washed over Gulf Harbor as officers moved in and out of the Monroe cottage, careful not to disturb anything that could help them find the missing 7-year-old. The house, usually filled with laughter, now carried only fear, whispers, and the soft sobs of a family shattered. Deputy Carla Jenkins, one of the first responders on scene, remembered the moment she stepped inside. It didn't feel like a runaway. It felt like someone had reached right into that home and stolen the air out of it. The back door was ajar. A small screen had been bent outward, and beneath the window, in the soft sand, was a single partial footprint. Too small to be a man's, too large to belong to either of the girls. It suggested one thing: whoever took Lila had been there before. While officers photographed the window and collected fibers from the frame, a social worker gently tried to speak with Sophie. The little girl sat curled in her mother's lap, clutching the hem of her pajama shirt, her tiny hands trembling. Her eyes darted to the bedroom door, as if the shadow she saw last night might walk through again. "What did you see, sweetheart?" the social worker asked softly. But Sophie shook her head. She didn't say a word. No one knew yet whether she couldn't speak or wouldn't. By noon, every officer in Gulf Harbor, and many from the surrounding counties, had joined the search. They combed the dunes behind the house, forming lines across the tall grasses that separated the cottages from the shoreline. Volunteers searched the boardwalk, the public beach access points, even the small mangrove trails leading toward the inlet. Helicopters circled overhead. Boats patrolled the shallow water near the marsh. Lila's photo, her bright blue eyes and sun-blonde hair, appeared on every news station across the Panhandle. Parents held their children tighter that day. The town, known for easy smiles and slow mornings, suddenly felt small, vulnerable, exposed. Investigators worked steadily through the house. No sign of forced entry except the window screen, no signs of struggle, no loud noises heard by neighbors, nothing missing except one small child's slippers. The quietness of the abduction frightened detectives more than anything else. "It takes planning to remove a child without a sound," Sheriff Daniel Hart later said. That's what made this case different. They found a faint smudge on the window frame, a print not clear enough to be useful, but enough to confirm someone had touched the house. The officers believed the intruder knew the layout of the home. They knew where the girls slept. They knew how to move without waking the parents. That fact chilled everyone, especially Rachel Monroe. By sunset, law enforcement expanded their search radius. They checked fishing docks, abandoned piers, empty vacation rentals, lifeguard shacks, marsh edges and tidal creeks, wooded trails leading toward the barrier islands, boat ramps and kayak launch points. Gulf Harbor had dozens of little pockets where someone could hide or slip away unnoticed. Deputies even visited local marinas, asking boat owners if they'd seen anything suspicious during the early morning hours. Some reported hearing a small motor. Others thought they saw a flashlight near the dunes, but none could identify who or what it was. That night, as the sun dipped into the Gulf like a copper coin sinking underwater, the town came together. Neighbors lit candles along the boardwalk, placing them near Lila's missing poster, the one with her smiling as she held a seashell she found on the beach. Church groups gathered on the sand and prayed. Fishermen closed their shops early to help search the shoreline. Teenagers who normally spent their evenings skateboarding volunteered to tape flyers on telephone poles. Gulf Harbor had never experienced something like this. It felt as though the disappearance of one child had shaken the entire coastline. Later that evening, while officers quietly reviewed their notes in the living room, Sophie tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Rachel dropped to her knees immediately. "Yes, baby." Sophie hesitated, glancing toward the hallway leading to her bedroom. I saw feet," she finally said. Her small voice cracked. "Not Daddy's, not yours." Rachel felt her heart collapse inside her chest. "Did someone come into your room?" she asked gently. Sophie nodded. "Did you see their face?" The little girl shook her head firmly, too frightened. But then she said something that froze every officer in the room. "They whispered to Lila, like they knew her." It wasn't much, but it told detectives the abductor wasn't a random drifter or someone passing through town. It was someone who had a reason, someone who believed Lila should go with them, someone who had been watching. Around 11 that night, a man called the sheriff's office claiming he saw a girl who looked like Lila near the old inlet bridge 2 hours earlier. Deputies rushed to the location. Flashlights cut across the rocks and pilings below the bridge. Search dogs sniffed the shoreline, but they found nothing. It was just the first of many false sightings that would consume precious time and emotional energy in the coming months. Hours passed. Midnight approached. Yet no one in Gulf Harbor went to bed. Parents sat awake in living rooms with their lights on. Neighbors paced their backyards with flashlights. Volunteers walked the quiet streets, checking alleys, playgrounds, porches. The ocean kept moving, waves rolling onto the beach as if unaware the town behind them was breaking. Inside the sheriff's office, maps were pinned to the walls. Officers drew circles indicating search zones, marked timestamps, and logged every call that came in. A bulletin board titled, "Where is Lila Monroe?" began to fill with notes, maps, and theories. This was only day one. 9 long months still stretched ahead. And somewhere out there, the little girl with sunlit hair was waiting, cold, scared, silent, alive. Here is part 3, one of the most emotionally heavy and suspense-building sections of the entire documentary. This part shows the breakdown of the early investigation, the widening search, the couple's first movements with Lila, and the moment the case officially becomes a state-level missing child crisis. All written in your signature Crimes Unsealed tone. Calm, cinematic, emotional, and ads-friendly. For the first 48 hours, investigators focused entirely on Gulf Harbor, its streets, its marsh trails, its boardwalks, its abandoned docks. But while the community searched tirelessly, something else was happening just a few miles away. The woman and man who had taken Lila were already on the move. That same morning, before the sun even lifted over the horizon, an old rust-colored van rolled slowly along a stretch of road that curved around the inlet. Inside, Lila sat wedged between blankets and plastic storage bins that smelled faintly of mildew and seaweed. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Her wide blue eyes stared at the window as marsh grass blurred past. The woman beside her, later identified as Claire Reed, kept one hand gently resting on Lila's shoulder. Her voice stayed low and warm, almost soothing. "Just a little farther, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're safe now." The man driving, Thomas Reed, said nothing, but the tightening of his jaw each time Lila shifted told a different story. They drove toward the Panhandle's lesser-known edges, forgotten fishing roads, dirt paths that led to old docks, twisting routes only locals who lived off-grid would know. They had planned this, far better than anyone realized. By the third morning, Gulf Harbor felt like a town holding its breath. Every news station across Florida opened with Lila's photo. The FBI began assisting quietly behind the scenes. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children added Lila to their database. Detectives visited households one by one asking, "Did anyone new come to your neighborhood recently? Did you hear a car late last night? Have you seen unfamiliar footprints near the beach?" Residents offered everything: security footage, home logs, even neighborhood gossip. But nothing pointed clearly toward a suspect. Everyone had a theory. No one had evidence. The Monroes sat together in their living room, exhausted, frightened, clinging to any hope officers brought. It wasn't until the third evening that Sophie found the courage to speak again. She tugged on her father's sleeve, whispering, "Daddy." The woman. She touched Lila's hair. Detectives paused. A woman. Up until that moment, investigators assumed the abductor was a man. The revelation changed everything. Sophie continued, voice shaking. She said, "Come on now, sweetheart." She said it soft. The tone, the familiarity, the tenderness. This wasn't a violent snatch and grab. This was someone who believed they were taking Lila for a purpose. Detectives began digging into recent visitors, local service workers, temporary rentals, even religious groups that traveled through the Panhandle. One name quietly surfaced more than once: the Reeds, a wandering couple who had been seen in several small Florida towns in recent months, speaking vaguely about saving chosen children and leading little ones to a better path. They had vanished just days before Lila did. 40 miles from Gulf Harbor, hidden behind a stretch of tall palmetto bushes and partially sunken sand, stood an abandoned fishing shack on stilts, weathered wood, rusted tin roof. Empty crab baskets dangling like wind chimes. This was where Claire and Thomas stopped next. Thomas dragged a tarp across the doorway. Claire knelt beside Lila, brushing salt-tangled hair out of her face. "You'll get used to it here," she murmured. "It's peaceful. Nobody will hurt you." Lila didn't answer, but Claire's calm voice wasn't comforting. It was rehearsed, practiced, like she had said these same words to someone before. Inside the shack, Lila noticed small details: a stack of canned food, a lantern, a blanket already laid out for a child, seashells arranged in a row, as if collected by small hands. It felt prepared, as if the couple had been waiting for her. Detectives widened the search grid outward, toward the shoreline roads leading north, toward the rural fishing communities that dotted the coast like faded postcards. More than 200 volunteers scoured the beaches and marshes. Search dogs picked up faint traces near the dunes, then lost them near the waterline, indicating the possibility of a boat or vehicle. Local fishermen towed the inlet from sunrise to sunset. Helicopters scanned the marsh channels. Deputies drove down every dirt road branching off the coastal highway. Still nothing. Lila's photo was now everywhere. Supermarkets, gas stations, diners, seafood shacks, community centers. But as each hour passed without new information, fear crept deeper into the Monroe home. While canvassing nearby Panhandle towns, a pair of detectives encountered a woman at a marina who remembered something strange. She recalled a thin, soft-spoken woman with wild blonde hair, Claire Reed, asking where to rent a small boat to take a child somewhere calm. The marina worker had assumed she was talking about her own daughter. Investigators traced that rental slip. The name wasn't Claire's, but the handwriting matched an old citation Thomas received for illegal camping at a state park. That was their first real lead, and it told detectives something chilling. The Reeds weren't randomly drifting. They were moving deliberately, spotting isolated places, mapping escape routes, watching families without being noticed. Someone like that could keep a child hidden for a long time, months, maybe longer. As days passed, Claire began speaking to Lila as though they were a family. "You were meant to come with us," she said gently. "We're going someplace better." She taught Lila how to walk quietly, how to keep her head down if she ever left the shack, and how to answer only when spoken to. Thomas, meanwhile, prepared their next move, shifting supplies, checking the tides, scouting the mangrove trails that led deeper into uninhabited areas. The more days passed, the clearer their intention became. They believed Lila was theirs. By the end of that first week, the entire state of Florida knew Lila Monroe's face. Major news networks ran the story every hour. Flyers were mailed statewide. Amber Alerts stayed active. Social media groups from 2005 flooded with tips and theories. The sheriff's office formed a task force specifically for the case. Maps covered every wall. Pins marked every false sighting, every abandoned structure, every fishing cabin, every boat rental in a 50-mile radius. Detective Grace Allwood summarized the urgency best. The longer a child is missing, the more the world starts assuming the worst. But this town didn't assume. They kept searching. But Lila was no longer anywhere near Gulf Harbor. She was hidden on the edge of the sea, in a shack no one would ever think to search, with a couple who believed they had saved her from the world she once knew. 9 months still lay ahead. 9 months before a miracle would finally break through the darkness. Here is part 4, the turning point where the trail goes cold. The town wrestles with fear and grief, and the Reeds tighten their control over Lila. This section deepens the emotional stakes and sets up the coming breakthrough. Written in your signature CrimesUnsealed tone, cinematic, emotional, ad-friendly, and paced for maximum retention. By the time the second week passed, something had shifted in Gulf Harbor. The early chaos of the search had settled into a heavy, suffocating quiet. The kind of quiet that makes every parent hold their child a little closer at night, and every neighbor glance twice at the strangers passing through town. Tips slowed, volunteers returned to work, reporters drifted toward bigger stories. But for the Monroe family, time had stopped. Rachel Monroe kept her daughter's bedroom door open each night. She couldn't bear the sight of Lila's empty bunk, but she also couldn't bring herself to close the door. Sophie slept curled against her mother now, waking often from nightmares she couldn't describe. Each time Rachel rubbed her back and whispered, "It wasn't your fault." But Sophie didn't believe her. In that small 5-year-old mind, she thought, "I saw the woman. I saw her take Lila, and I didn't say anything." Detectives knew the guilt could crush a child, if not handled gently. A child psychologist began visiting Sophie twice a week, slowly helping her unravel fragments of memory, tones, shadows, whispers, but no detail was enough to find where Lila had gone. Detective Grace Allwood stared at the case board late into the night more times than she could count. Dozens of small notes now covered the surface. Possible boat. Footprint near dunes. Woman's voice. Reed seen in multiple towns. Shack. Cabin, fishing hut, but nothing connected cleanly. The Reeds remained ghosts, drifting through Florida without leaving more than scattered receipts and odd stories behind. The local sheriff's office had never seen anything like them. They weren't hitchhikers. They weren't vagrants. They weren't career criminals. They were wanderers with a mission, carrying an unsettling conviction that made them unpredictable. The case file grew thicker. Answers grew thinner. While the town searched desperately, Lila's world had shrunk to one small room with wooden walls that rattled whenever the wind picked up. Claire Reed spent her days whispering stories about chosen children and safe places. She braided Lila's hair, taught her small tasks, and insisted she call her Mama Claire. Lila never did. Thomas Reed, however, kept his distance. He spent hours outside, walking the shoreline, marking paths through the palmetto bushes, checking the weather, listening to radios for any mention of their names. He spoke very little to Lila, but when he did, it was with stern authority. Quiet feet. Don't talk unless Claire says. Stay near the wall if anyone comes to the door. It became clear they were preparing for something. Another move, another hiding place, another attempt to disappear completely. Sometimes, when Claire stepped outside, Lila pressed her ear to the wooden planks. In these stolen moments, the ocean became her only friend. The waves rolled in and out like a heartbeat, steady, familiar, safe. She memorized each sound, every pattern, every opening in the floorboards that let sunlight through. A small seashell she found under the shack steps became her lifeline. She kept it hidden beneath her blanket, rubbing its smooth surface whenever fear threatened to overwhelm her. That seashell would one day lead someone to her, but not yet. By month 2, the official search had reached nearly 30 miles beyond Gulf Harbor. Officers checked every fishing hut, boat ramp, campground, vacant beach house, and old trailer they could access. Still nothing. But Gulf Harbor refused to give up. Every Friday evening, the community gathered on the beach with candles, forming a glowing circle that stretched across the sand. They sang prayers, shared updates, and passed out new flyers that replaced the sun-faded ones curling on telephone poles. Neighbors brought food to the Monroe family. Strangers mailed letters of support. Tourists who learned about the case donated to the search fund. One note left at the sheriff's office simply read, "Bring her home." Detectives pinned it on the case board to remind themselves why they kept going. Inside the shack, Claire Reed's fantasies intensified. She told Lila they would soon sail to a new place where no one could take her away. She hummed lullabies at night, weaving strange stories about chosen children and divine missions. And each day she repeated, "You were meant for us. You belong with us." Lila didn't understand the words, but she understood the fear beneath them. Claire had built her world out of delusions, and Lila was trapped inside it. Only Thomas saw flashes of reality. One night, after Claire fell asleep, Thomas stepped outside and stared toward the distant lights of Gulf Harbor across the water. "You know this can't last," he muttered. Though no one could hear him, he was right. Their isolation couldn't hold forever. In late August, nearly 3 months after Lila disappeared, a fisherman named Alvin Porter reported seeing an odd-looking family near the marsh. A tall man, a thin woman with wild hair, and a small girl wearing oversized sunglasses and a hooded sweatshirt despite the heat. He mentioned the girl wouldn't speak. The woman answered for her. The man kept glancing at the road. The trio walked like they didn't belong. Alvin told this to a deputy who was juggling multiple calls that day. The deputy wrote it down on the wrong form and placed it in the wrong folder. By the time it reached the task force, 7 days had passed. 7 days. Enough time for the Reeds to relocate again. This time deeper inland. toward a cluster of abandoned cabins near an old storm-damaged pier. A discovery that almost came in time, but didn't. September arrived. Children returned to school. The tourists left. Hurricane season cast a humid stillness over the Panhandle, and Lila Monroe's case, once the heart of every conversation in town, slipped into the place investigators hated most, the cold zone, not closed, not forgotten, but stalled. Detective Alwood refused to accept it. "We don't stop until she comes home," she told her team, "even if that takes years." But no one could imagine that the turning point would come not from an officer, not from a detective, not even from a volunteer, but from a child. A small child carrying a detail so powerful, it would reopen the case and lead investigators straight toward the truth. Here is part 5, the moment the entire case shifts. This section is emotional, tense, and structured exactly like the turning point in a Netflix or Cold Case Desk documentary. It is ads-friendly, non-graphic, and perfectly matched to your Crimes Unsealed tone. Autumn settled over the Florida Panhandle with a heavy, humid stillness. Days grew shorter, nights grew cooler. But inside the Monroe home, time felt frozen. 4 months had passed since Lila vanished. 4 months of hope, heartbreak, and silence. Sophie Monroe, now 5.5, had begun speaking again, but only about everyday things. She talked about her dolls, her cereal, her favorite shell on the windowsill. But she never talked about that night, not until one evening, when something finally broke through. It happened during a quiet moment in the living room. Rachel had placed a small pile of folded laundry on the couch. Shirts, towels, and 2 sweaters the girls used to share. Sophie picked up one of Lila's sweaters, the soft blue one with the tiny embroidered dolphins. She held it gently, pressing it to her cheek. Suddenly her expression changed. Her eyes grew distant, frightened, remembering something she had tried so hard to forget. "Mommy," she whispered. "Lila was wearing this, the night the lady took her." Rachel froze. "Honey, what lady?" Sophie swallowed hard. "The lady with the bracelets." Rachel's heart stopped. Bracelets. The detail slammed through her memory. A neighbor once mentioned a wandering woman with stacks of metal bracelets clinking on her wrists. Detectives had been searching for her for months. This was the first time Sophie had ever described something so specific. Rachel called Detective Alwood immediately. Within an hour, the living room filled with quiet footsteps as investigators arrived, sitting on the carpet across from Sophie at eye level. Detective Alwood spoke softly. "You did something very brave by telling your mom. We're here to help bring Lila home. Can you tell us about the bracelets?" Sophie hesitated, her small fingers curling around the dolphin sweater. "They were silver, and they made sounds, like little bells." Detectives exchanged glances. Claire Reed, the woman they believed might be involved, was known to wear multiple silver bangles that jingled when she moved. Sophie continued, voice trembling. "She touched Lila's hair. She said, 'Come with me, sweetheart. It's time.'" A silence filled the room, not the scared kind, but the kind that meant the truth was finally taking shape. Detectives gently pressed further. "What else do you remember, Sophie?" The little girl closed her eyes. "There was a smell." "A smell?" She nodded. "Like the ocean, and fish, and old wood." Detective Alwood's breath caught. The description matched the old docks, an area full of abandoned fishing huts, storm-damaged piers, and decaying wooden walkways. Places police had searched, but not thoroughly enough. Then Sophie added one more detail, the detail that cracked the entire case open. The lady had a rope. She put it on Lila's hand, not tight, just holding it. A soft lead rope, not binding, but guiding. Exactly how someone like Claire Reed would treat a child she believed she was saving. Detectives had what they needed. Detectives compared Sophie's description with witness reports from earlier in the summer. A fisherman had described a woman with jangling silver bracelets and a quiet little girl who refused to speak. A different witness had mentioned a tall man walking with them near the marsh. Another saw a rust-colored van on a dirt road that led toward the old inlet. The pieces fit together. Finally. Detective Allwood stood over the caseboard, eyes narrowing, adrenaline tightening her chest. "They were here," she said, pointing to a cluster of red pins near the coast. "Not passing through, not hiding randomly. They stayed. This is their territory." Her team agreed. If the Reeds were still in Florida, they were likely living somewhere near the forgotten edges of the Panhandle. Lila's world had changed too. Claire and Thomas had moved her from the shack to a different hideout, an old, storm-damaged hunting cabin tucked inside a pocket of dense palmettos. The cabin smelled of mildew and brine. Its windows were boarded. Its walls creaked whenever the wind pushed against them. Claire spoke more urgently now. "We'll have to go farther soon," she told Lila one night, braiding her hair by lantern light. "There are people looking for you, but don't worry. We'll keep you safe." Thomas listened from the corner, sharpening a fishing knife on a whetstone. He wasn't polishing it for violence. He used it for everything: rope, food, repairs. But the sound of metal scraping stone made Lila's stomach twist, not because Thomas frightened her physically, but because he seemed ready to run at any moment, like a man who knew his time was running out. Back at the sheriff's office, detectives used Sophie's new details to draft a fresh search grid. This time they weren't guessing. They had a woman with jingling bracelets, a smell of old fish and docks, soft lead rope, coastal marsh environment, sightings near an old bridge, and a pattern of movement consistent with the Reed's history. Detective Allwood circled the cluster of abandoned structures along the inlet. "This is where they are," she said, "or where they were." The task force mobilized again, reinvigorated. Hopes rose. Volunteers returned. News reports reignited. The town held on to something it had almost lost: belief. As detectives were packing up to leave, Sophie called out softly, "Wait!" Everyone stopped. "The lady," she sang a song, a lullaby. "What kind of lullaby?" Detective Allwood asked gently. Sophie hummed the melody. Slow, haunting, familiar. Rachel gasped. That's not one of ours," she whispered. "I've never sung that to her." Detective Allwood closed her eyes. They had heard that lullaby before. A woman in a neighboring town had once reported a strange couple sitting on a park bench, the woman singing that exact tune to a toddler who wasn't hers. That report was tied to Claire Reed. When detectives left the Monroe home that night, they were no longer searching blindly. They had a suspect, a pattern, a location radius, a timeline, a method, and a small child's memory, fragile but powerful, pointing them straight toward the couple who had taken Lila. For the first time in months, Detective Allwood felt it: a path forward. What they didn't know was that the Reeds were already preparing to move again, deeper inland, closer to the forgotten corners of the Panhandle. And that move would lead them straight toward the moment the world would finally see Lila again. Alive. Here is part 6, the pivotal chapter where the Reeds make their most dangerous move yet. Investigators tighten the search grid, and a near-miss encounter leaves everyone breathless. Written to keep viewers hooked, emotionally invested, and watching to the end. As September bled into October, the Florida Panhandle braced for storm season. Heavy clouds rolled over the coastline, turning the sky a muted gray. The air swelled thick with humidity, the kind that clings to your skin and warns of rain long before it falls. Detectives across the region worked with renewed urgency. Sophie's memories had given them direction, but storms could easily erase whatever traces remained. Every day mattered, every hour counted. Based on Sophie's descriptions and the newly rediscovered fisherman report, Detective Allwood narrowed the search to a strip of coastline dense with palmettos, twisted mangroves, and abandoned structures left behind after Hurricane Eloise decades earlier. These areas were hard to access, barely patrolled, filled with old fishing shacks, perfect for off-grid hiding. A team of officers surveyed the terrain, noting collapsed roofs, half-sunken piers, and rusted boat hulls swallowed by weeds. "This is where they go," Allwood said, pointing to a cluster of cabin remains on an old map. "No electricity, no neighbors, no questions." The search grid tightened. The pressure increased, and far from Gulf Harbor, Claire and Thomas Reed felt it too. Storm winds hammered the small cabin where the Reeds kept Lila hidden. Palm fronds slapped against the walls. The roof creaked with each gust. Claire hovered over Lila, smoothing her hair anxiously. "We have to go soon," she murmured, glancing toward the boarded window. "People are looking for you. They want to take you away." Thomas paced near the door, restless, agitated. "They're getting closer," he muttered. "We shouldn't stay here." Claire grasped his arm. "Just a few more days. Let the storm pass." But Thomas shook his head. "We don't have a few more days." Lila sat silently in the corner, clutching her hidden seashell in her small hand. The wind howled. The walls trembled. This wasn't home. This was something else. Something she knew wasn't right, even at 7 years old. At the sheriff's office in Gulf Harbor, a break came from an unexpected source. A man repairing a stretch of rural road reported seeing an old rust-colored van parked deep near the mangroves 2 days earlier. He mentioned 3 things. 1, a thin woman wearing silver bracelets. 2, a man loading supplies into the van. 3, a small figure sitting quietly in the back. That was enough. Detective Allwood called for immediate ground units. "Find that van." At the cabin, Thomas Reed's tension snapped into sharp focus. He moved quickly, packing food cans, water jugs, and blankets into a backpack. "We're leaving tonight," he said. "Storm or no storm." Claire's face twitched. Fear, anger, uncertainty. "Thomas, she's not ready." "She doesn't have to be ready," he snapped. "We can't stay." Claire glared at him, her voice tightening with conviction. "She belongs with us. Don't forget that." But even she knew they were running out of time. Thunder rolled across the sky. Lila flinched at the sound. Claire knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, get your shoes on. We're going on a little trip." Lila didn't move. Her fingers closed tighter around the seashell. By late afternoon, a convoy of law enforcement vehicles cut through a narrow dirt road leading to the old inlet cabins. Detective Allwood's heart pounded as they approached the first abandoned structure, a shack half collapsed, covered in vines. "Clear!" an officer shouted after searching it. They moved to the next, and the next. Finally, they reached a weather-beaten cabin that looked recently disturbed, footprints in damp soil, a fresh tarp flapping in the storm wind. Detective Allwood's flashlight swept across the doorframe. Her breath hitched. A small seashell rested on the step, not placed accidentally, placed gently, as if by a child. "Someone was here," she whispered. Her voice shook. "Someone close." Inside, they found signs of life. A lantern still warm, a child's cup, a blanket arranged carefully. A small wooden carving Thomas had whittled recently. The room was empty. The storm howled outside. "They just left," an officer said. "They were minutes, maybe hours behind. As officers searched the inlet, the Reeds trudged through knee-high marsh water on foot, dragging a plastic sled carrying supplies. Lightning split the sky. Rain hammered the earth. The storm was gaining strength, a shield that would hide their footprints and cover their scent. Claire held Lila tightly by the wrist. "We have to go faster," she urged. But Lila stumbled. Her legs trembled from exhaustion. Thomas looked back. Frustration etched onto his face. "She's slowing us down," Claire snapped. "She's a child." But Thomas wasn't concerned about Lila. He was concerned about being caught. Their fragile partnership was cracking with every step. Hours later, as the storm thinned just enough for visibility, a park ranger driving along a service trail noticed something odd in his headlights. A woman, a man, and a little girl walking in the rain. The ranger slowed, studying them through the wipers. "A family out here in this weather?" he muttered. The woman clutched the child's hand tightly. The man avoided eye contact. The ranger rolled down his window. "Hey, is everything all right? You folks need help?" Claire forced a too-wide smile. "We're fine, just trying to get back to our camp." But the ranger wasn't convinced. "Where's your campsite?" She hesitated. Thomas tightened his grip on Lila. "Just up ahead," he growled. The ranger caught a glimpse of something that made his heart drop. The little girl wasn't dressed for the storm. Her sweatshirt was thin, her sandals were soaked, and she wouldn't look up. The ranger's instinct screamed, "Something's wrong." He radioed quietly as he pulled away. "Possible family in distress near Trail 12. Sending coordinates." It was the closest anyone had come to rescuing Lila, but the storm swallowed the Reeds into darkness once again. As Detective Allwood was preparing to expand the search northward, her radio crackled. "Possible sighting of a couple with a child. Coordinates sent." Her heart stopped. "Describe the child," she demanded. The ranger replied, "Blonde, small, looked about 7. That was all she needed. "Everyone move, now!" Within minutes, officers headed straight toward the trail system leading deeper into the marsh. But the storm had washed away any footprints, any trace, any chance of knowing which direction the Reeds had gone. It was a devastating setback, but it confirmed one thing. Lila was alive, and closer than anyone realized. Here is part 7, the most suspense-filled chapter yet. This is the part where the world finally begins closing in on the Reeds. The community receives a spark of hope, and one encounter sets off the chain reaction that will ultimately save Lila. Written in your signature Crimes Unsealed documentary tone. Emotional, cinematic, calm, suspenseful, and ad-friendly. The storm that swallowed the Florida Panhandle began to ease by morning. Sunlight pushed through the clouds in narrow beams, illuminating the marshes where officers had searched through the night. The air felt heavy, with moisture, with tension, with the knowledge that they had come achingly close. Detective Allwood stood on the trail where the ranger had seen the couple only hours before. She pressed her hand to her forehead, exhausted, frustrated, but more determined than ever. The ranger approached her, pointing to a stretch of mangroves. "They disappeared in that direction." "I'm sure of it," he said. Allwood nodded. "It means they're running, and if they're running, they're scared," the ranger finished. "Scared people make mistakes, and the Reeds were about to make a very big one." After pushing through the storm all night, Claire and Thomas Reed reached a thin, sandy ridge that led to a small, isolated pocket of land. Thomas knelt by their supplies, inspecting what remained. "We can't stay in Florida," he muttered. "Too many eyes now, too many people looking." Claire's eyes widened in fear. "This wasn't supposed to happen." "What did you expect?" he snapped. "They're not going to stop searching for a missing 7-year-old. Claire knelt beside Lila, cupping her cheeks. "Sweetheart, Listen, we're going on a journey soon. We'll find somewhere new, somewhere safe. But Lila didn't answer. She was too tired, too scared, too cold. She held her seashell close, rubbing it with her thumb the same way she always did when she felt alone. The shell's smooth surface kept her grounded, kept her calm. It would save her life in more ways than one. Back in town, a miracle had happened. The sighting by the ranger had reignited the entire community. People gathered outside the sheriff's office, holding hands, praying, sharing tips, volunteering vehicles and boats. Rachel Monroe held on to a grainy printed image of the coordinates where the ranger had spotted the trio. "This means she's alive," she whispered to her husband. "She's alive." It was the first time she'd said those words aloud in months. The task force doubled in size overnight. 90 officers, deputies, and volunteers prepared to comb the trails in coordinated shifts. Detective Allwood briefed them, "We're dealing with two experienced drifters. They know how to camp, how to hide, and how to move quietly. But they're exhausted. Their supplies are low, and they know we're close." The room was silent. "We will find her," Allwood added. "Today, tomorrow, however long it takes." And she meant every word. While the search in the marsh resumed, the Reeds made a risky decision. Thomas believed they needed more supplies, food, water, batteries, before they attempted to leave the state. Claire disagreed, but Thomas ignored her, gripping Lila's wrist as he guided her through the brush toward a small Panhandle town 30 miles from Gulf Harbor. They disguised Lila the same way they always did. Oversized hoodie, sunglasses far too big for her face, a cap pulled low. Claire walking close, answering for her. Thomas scanning every exit. It was the perfect disguise for a child forced into silence. But disguises only work until someone looks closely enough. In the small beachside town of Seabreeze Point, a man named Hank Larimore opened his old bait shop for the morning. A retired fisherman with a kind face and decades of stories behind him, Hank knew everyone in the area. He noticed the trio the moment they walked in. The man, the woman, the child in the oversized sweatshirt. Claire spoke quickly, nervously. "Do you have any powdered milk and, crackers?" Hank nodded slowly, observing them. He had seen worried tourists before. He had seen families traveling with shy kids. But this little girl, there was something different. She kept one hand hidden deep inside her pocket, gripping something like it was the only thing keeping her steady. Her posture was stiff, her head low, her silence unnatural. And then he saw it, a tiny flash of something pale between her fingers, a seashell. Hank froze. He had seen that exact seashell in Lila Monroe's missing photo, the one taken on Gulf Harbor Beach. His heart began to beat hard. He leaned slightly over the counter, smiling softly at the girl. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said gently. "You like seashells?" The girl didn't answer, but her shoulders tensed. Claire stepped between them quickly. "She's shy," she snapped. Hank nodded, keeping his face calm. "Well, that's all right. Nothing wrong with being shy." He rang up the item slowly, forcing himself to speak casually, even as adrenaline pulsed through him. The couple paid. Thomas tugged the child toward the exit. But before leaving, Claire said something that chilled Hank. "We won't be here long." Hank waited until they stepped outside before he reached for the phone. Hands shaking, he dialed. "Sheriff's office?" A pause. "This is Hank Larimore at Seabreeze Point. I think I just saw the Monroe girl." Within minutes, the sheriff's office exploded with movement. Dispatch sent cars in all directions. Helicopters scrambled. Officers armed with photographs jumped into vehicles ready to sweep the surrounding streets. Detective Allwood called Hank personally. "Tell me exactly what you saw." Hank took a breath. A couple, a tall man, a thin woman with bracelets. The girl, she looked tired and scared. He hesitated. Detective, she had a seashell, the one from the posters. She held it like her life depended on it. Detective Allwood closed her eyes. That's her, she breathed. This wasn't just another sighting. This was the sighting. Finally, after 9 months of darkness, they were close enough to reach out and grab the truth. As the sheriff's office mobilized, Thomas pulled Lila down a side alley, glancing back toward the bait shop. "They're watching us," he hissed. Claire's eyes darted wildly. "No, no, no." She didn't talk. He couldn't know. Thomas shook his head. He looked at her too long. "We're leaving." Claire gripped Lila's wrist tightly. "We were meant to save her," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. But Lila didn't hear the words. All she saw was the street, people, cars, possibilities. For the first time in 9 months, she saw the world again, and she wondered, is someone looking for me? She didn't know it yet, but someone was. Someone who would change everything. The streets of Seabreeze Point buzzed with quiet urgency. Patrol cars drifted through intersections. Plainclothes officers blended into crowds. Helicopters hovered low enough to rattle the awnings of little beach shops. Detective Grace Allwood leaned over the hood of her vehicle, eyes locked on the map Hank Larimore had pointed out. "They were on foot," Grace said. "They'll take alleys, side roads, back trails. They don't want to be seen." She circled 3 locations. "Check these first." Her radio crackled. Units converging. The net was closing. Meanwhile, Thomas gripped Lila's wrist hard as they hurried down a narrow alley behind a row of shuttered ice cream shops. Claire hurried beside them, whispering frantic reassurances. "They're not looking for you. You're safe with us." But her voice shook. Her hands shook. Everything shook. Thomas turned sharply toward a fence leading to a nature trail. "We get to the woods. We disappear." But they didn't know something vital. Detective Allwood had already predicted that exact escape route, and officers were waiting. A young deputy named Mason Grant spotted the trio first. He recognized the girl instantly, not from her face, which was half hidden by the oversized hoodie, but from the way she walked. Small steps, head down, silent. "Lila?" he said softly, stepping forward. Thomas froze. Claire gasped, and the little girl turned her head, just slightly, but it was enough. Grant raised his palms. "No one's here to hurt her," he said, voice steady. "We just want to bring her home." Thomas pulled Lila closer. "She is home." Claire clung to Lila's arm, voice trembling. "She belongs with us. She was meant for us. She's—" "No," Grant said gently. "She has a family, a real one, and they've been waiting 9 months to hold her again." Those words hit Lila like a bolt of lightning. A family, her family. She looked up, really looked up, for the first time in months. Her lips trembled. "Mommy," she whispered. Thomas panicked. He shoved Grant hard and bolted toward the trail with Lila in tow. Grant called it in immediately. Contact made. They're running with the child, heading toward Trail 7. Within seconds, officers swarmed the area from both sides. Thomas dragged Lila faster, stumbling through palmettos and roots. Claire followed, sobbing, begging him to slow down. "Stop!" Grant shouted. "You'll hurt her!" But the reeds didn't stop, not until they reached the dead-end clearing, a sandy drop-off overlooking the marsh. Thomas spun around. No escape. No way forward. Officers closing in. Lila's chest rose and fell in shallow gasps. Her small fingers clutched the tiny seashell tighter than ever. Grant stepped forward slowly. "Let her go," he said softly. "It's over." Thomas looked down at Lila. Something in her eyes, something quietly pleading, broke whatever belief he'd been clinging to. And then he released her wrist. Claire collapsed. Thomas dropped to his knees. Officers moved in. And Lila ran. Straight into Deputy Grant's arms. When the patrol car pulled into Gulf Harbor, a crowd had already formed. Rachel Monroe stood at the front, one hand covering her mouth, the other trembling uncontrollably. The door opened, and a tiny figure stepped out, clutching a seashell. "Mommy?" Rachel didn't walk. She ran. She dropped to her knees and wrapped Lila in her arms, sobbing into her daughter's hair. "You're home," she whispered. "You're finally home." The crowd cried. Officers cried. Even the sheriff looked away, wiping his eyes. 9 long months, hundreds of volunteers, one determined community, and a little girl who never stopped believing someone was searching for her. Claire and Thomas Reed were taken into custody without further struggle and later charged with kidnapping and interference with custody. Their trial drew national attention, but the Monroes stayed mostly out of the spotlight. Their only priority was healing. Detective Allwood visited the family weeks later. Lila greeted her at the door, seashell still in hand. "I kept it safe," she said proudly. Grace smiled. "You certainly did." If this emotional journey resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Crimes Unsealed for more gripping stories of hope, survival, and truth recovered from the darkest corners.